Whenever Nikola Jokic and Victor Wembanyama face off, all of us NBA fans are in for a treat. We get to watch the two best centers in the game by far do battle. Arguably the best offensive player ever versus perhaps the greatest defensive talent ever. The three-time MVP versus the potential future GOAT. And this year, the matchup feels even bigger because Wemby has ascended again, making a legitimate push for MVP this year, and the Spurs have become a dominant team while the Nuggets remain a contender. Going into their matchup on Saturday, the Spurs had won 26 of the last 27 games that Wemby played in, while the Nuggets had won 7 straight in their own right. It doesn't get better than that on paper or in reality, because this was perhaps the duel of the year, which is what I've come to expect from these two. Wemby and Jokic have met 7 times in their careers, and both of them have put up monstrous numbers in those games, and that's including rookie Wemby when he was not nearly the player he's become. If we look just at their 3 meetings over the last 2 seasons, the numbers become even more unfathomable. Wemby is averaging basically an efficient 30, 20, and 5 with his defense, and he was outstanding on Saturday. But I'm sorry, look at what Jokic is doing, man. How is that even real? Wemby is having one of the greatest defensive seasons ever. He may well become the first ever unanimous defensive player of the year. The Spurs defensive rating with Wemby on the court is identical to the Thunder's defensive rating this season. And the Thunder have the best relative defensive rating since the 60s Celtics. But Jokic just dropped 48 and 13 on the Spurs on 63% true shooting with 0 turnovers and more or less just kept up his averages when he plays against Wemby. So as much as I love Wemby and as great as he was Saturday, I want to talk about that because yes, Jokic is just the best offensive player in the game, but those numbers are absurd even for him, especially while facing a historic defender. So why is it that Jokic is the one player who can do this to Wemby? Why is he so specifically Wemby proof? It starts with Jokic's scoring superpowers, a totally unmatched combination of strength and touch. Wemby's greatest value to a defense, his superpower, is his ability to take away the rim. But Jokic has the perfect counter to that. He is the greatest paint touch shot maker in NBA history. So he doesn't have to challenge Wemby at the rim to produce layup efficiency. He can get up these quick floaters and hook shots over Wemby. And in head-to-head matchups against Wemby, Jokic has shot over 71% on these shots inside the paint, but outside the restricted area. And he's scored over 11 points per game off of them. We've seen Jokic hunt these shots in different ways, but the bottom line is that if given any airspace at all, Jokic is completely lethal from floater range, as he showed when he iced Saturday's game after being left with too much room. It's also incredibly difficult for even Wemby to deny Jokic from getting to his touch shots out of the post one-on-one. Wemby's size and length is so absurd that he will certainly affect and probably block a couple of these shots in a game, but Jokic is so strong that he can chisel his way into deep paint position, give Wemby a big bump, and then float a hook shot quickly over him. And those are extremely efficient shots for Jokic. He's also been especially decisive against Wemby, which is needed considering Wemby can recover so quickly, but these touch shots are extremely difficult for any defender, even one as great, big, and long as Wemby, to affect. And if Jokic can get one up cleanly, it's very likely going in. Then, of course, there's the fact that sometimes Jokic can just hit a shot like this, for which there is truly no defense. Jokic's jump shooting is another excellent way for him to counter Wemby's ultimate defensive value. Wemby's trying to stay near the basket here so he can be disruptive as a helper, but he gives Jokic too much space and he pays. Out of pick and roll, Wemby much prefers to play drop coverage so he can deter any shots around the basket, but this leaves him vulnerable to a great pick and pop big like Jokic, who made him pay a a couple times on Saturday accordingly. Jokic can also run inverted pick and rolls as the ball handler, and Wemby wants to go under these screens so the Spurs don't have to switch and grant Jokic a mismatch. But this is too much space and Jokic hits the midi. And here, as Wemby goes under again, that floater proves to be deadly once more. Basically, Wemby wants to always be around the basket as a deterrent and rim protector. That's how he breaks the game for opposing offenses. But he can't get away with that against Jokic because his touch is too good to leave him. And when Jokic does pull Wemby out into space, it opens up the paint for his teammates. He delivers a beautiful pass over top here to Aaron Gordon, and there's no help because Wemby is glued to Jokic. He simply stresses Wemby in a way no other center does. On this crucial play, Jokic is running around a screen and Wemby gets caught trailing the play out in space. So they have to put 2 on Jokic to allow Wemby to recover, and the best passer in the league finds AG once again for a game-tying dunk. Jokic's ability to space the floor and play from the perimeter also allows him to draw matchups other than Wemby. Like, Wemby has to step up to help on a drive here, but Jokic floats to the corner, and his shooting threat forces Vassell to close out on him, which means Jokic can now post up a much smaller player, so Wemby has to help, and this is an easy kick-out pass for a huge 4-point play. 2 possessions later, Jokic's pop forces the late switch because you can't just leave him, and he's able to post up another mismatch and draw a foul. Jokic has always been excellent at picking his spots to opportunistically attack defenders other than Wemby whenever possible, which is very smart, but he also has genuinely cooked Wemby one-on-one, scoring 17 points per game on 66% true shooting when directly defended by Wemby across these matchups. That is remarkable. His strength, and especially his GOAT touch, truly makes him the perfect foil to Wemby's defensive superpowers. But as incredible as it is that Jokic has bodied Wemby like that, I honestly say the reason Jokic has been so incredibly effective against the Spurs has a lot to do with the construction of their roster. Think about the teams that have found the most success guarding Jokic, understanding that success is relative here because his offense is that great. But the 3 that come to mind to me are last year's Clippers, the 2024 Timberwolves, and the Thunder over the last 2 seasons. Out of those teams, only the Clippers found success against Jokic with a relatively traditional formula because Ivica Zubac is the best Jokic defender in the league, as he can actually completely match his strength out of the post with great size. The Timberwolves and Thunder both mixed things up against Jokic, especially OKC because they just have unmatched amounts of defensive talent and buttons to push, but the signature base look for both teams was to play 2 bigs, putting a 7-foot thick defender on Jokic out of the post to try to counter his strength, that being Cat or Ihart, with their all-world rim protector, that being Gobert or Chet, roaming off of another matchup, constantly looming in help to disrupt Jokic anytime he got near the basket and to take away some of his interior passes. It didn't take one great defender to bother Jokic. It took a whole formula. This is the reality when you're dealing with great offensive players. You don't guard them with an individual, you guard them as a team. Wemby may be a very good post defender, but he, like Gobert or Chet, is far and away most impactful as a rim protector, a helper. But the Spurs can't deploy him as a roamer against Jokic because there's nobody else they could put on Jokic who could remotely hold their own. They don't have a psycho freak like Caruso or J-Dub for OKC who can guard way above their size. They almost never play Wemby with another big, and they don't even have a big forward in their rotation who could offer any physical resistance to Jokic as a post defender. Nobody who's even like 6'8", 230. They don't have the formula as a team. Theoretically, the Spurs could go to a double big look with Kornet and Wemby as a counter, but they've hardly played those 2 together at all this season because it's very clunky offensively. We might see them try it in a playoff series, but probably only if things were going pretty badly. So because Jokic would go through any other Spur alongside Wemby like tissue paper, they have to use Wemby as his primary defender, which means he can't be parked in the paint all day wreaking havoc. Jokic can pull him out away from the basket or punish him for refusing to do so. And it means Jokic only has to beat Wemby one-on-one. Compare that to Jokic dealing with the Thunder defense, that swarm of bodies with elite collective speed, length, physicality, and instincts. A team that has excellent post defense and elite backline rim protection. And as great as Wemby is, just dealing with him is simply an easier task. Nobody stops Jokic one-on-one. This is why it's always been so annoying to me when people try to clown on Gobert for not doing so, because look, Wemby can't either. But the Timberwolves had another answer defensively. The Spurs haven't shown us that. It's a matchup thing on both sides, because on the flip side, think about how Wemby is at his most impactful in another key matchup against the Thunder and their superstar. When facing the Spurs, SGA has to first beat his defender and then also deal with Wemby, who's roaming off a weak shooter like Alex Caruso to aggressively help on Shea all game. The Spurs can basically dedicate two defenders primarily to Shea. When he's on the perimeter, he's guarded by a strong point of attack defender, and once he gets into the paint, he's confronted by Wemby in his most destructive role. That essentially forces Shea to make a lot of kickout passes to an open but sketchy shooter like Caruso, which is an outcome the Spurs are good with. So the Spurs defense, with their perimeter athleticism and a roaming Wemby, is perfectly built to make life hard on the Thunder offense and just about every offense in the NBA, but not really the Nuggets. Matchups are everything, and although Wemby pushes Jokic to adjust, he and the Spurs haven't really made Jokic uncomfortable, at least not enough to keep him from averaging 37, 11, and 9 on 62% true shooting when he's faced Wemby. That's not to say the Nuggets would be favored in a series against the Spurs, but I'd imagine they'd feel much better about that matchup than they would about facing the Thunder again. For now, Jokic has the upper hand in this matchup, but knowing Wemby, I'm sure he'll have something to say about that, and I can't wait to see them do battle again, hopefully in a playoff series soon, because basketball doesn't get better than this.